So I was reading through the internet the other day. Yeah, I know, bad idea, terrible, terrible idea. But, once in a while I do bad things. So I was reading the internet and I saw a question that is very commonly asked. When should I automate? Right? Someone who is looking at all these problems that they've built up this tremendous automation debt. I've got this manual things. When should I have automated them? And going forward, when should I automate so I don't get myself into this problem? And they got the usual answer, which is automate the second time. It's a terrible answer. Unfortunately, it's the answer that works well for the person who's giving it, but it will work terribly for the receiver. And the reason is because there's a very important difference in their contexts, right? Automate the second time works wonderfully when it's not an early automation. When it's one of the later automations and you've already automated a lot of things, sure, good enough, go for it. And the people who are answering questions on the internet tend to be the experts. They tend to be the people who have already been there, done that a number of times. As such, they're in a very different context. Now, the most important difference about this is a thing that I call important minutes. Right? So important minutes happen in a project. There are those moments where when you have a delay by a single minute, it delays the whole thing by 1 minute. So if I'm talking about deployment to production, if my deployment to production takes a minute, then the whole project is delayed by a minute. If it takes an hour, my whole project is delayed by an hour. Now, the difference between the questioner and the asker earlier is that the questioner is asking, when should I automate, especially these things that are in important minutes, because they're the ones that matter, right? And the answerer is saying, I should automate for these things that are happening mostly in unimportant minutes, because I've already automated all the things that were in important minutes. Right? So let's look at why that really matters. Right? And it matters because during important minutes, automating the second time has an uncertain return, it's impractical, and it's expensive. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, first, uncertain return. Automating the second time, second could be a fluke, right? We don't know by time 2 that it's ever going to happen again. If it had happened 30 times in a week, we're pretty confident it's going to happen again. But if it's only happened twice, even if those are only an hour apart, I don't know. Like, it might happen, it might not. Second, it's impractical. On the second time, it happens during important minutes, right? So in important minutes, I need to get this done. And manual processes are, by definition, slow. So I'm already doing a slow process when urgency is required, right? Automation is only going to slow me down. Doing any sort of automation, especially writing a computer program, that's slow, it's expensive, it's hard. That's going to slow down my time in important minutes when I can least afford it. So I can't do it during the second time or before the second time. I have to do it after the second time, after important minutes are over. And then we run into the first problem again. We have uncertainty again. Because now it's only happened twice. And these important minutes are over. Really? Should I automate it now? I don't know. I'd like to collect more data. Right? And the third problem is it's expensive. And the reason I want to collect more data is because creating automation is expensive. It's a software project. And not only is it a software project, all of which are expensive, it's also a discovery project. Right? If it's only happened twice, I don't know how it's going to happen next time. There's going to be some things that were in common between the 2 times it occurred and some things that were different. But that pattern is not going to match the third time. The third time is going to have new variations and it's going to duplicate some of the stuff that happened before. Right? I need to see more runs and get more data before I can start to see what really varies and what really stays the same, start to see those patterns. When I automate, I want to automate the patterns. I want to know what they are. Right? So the second time is too early. So those 3 things together, it's an uncertain return, it's impractical, and it's expensive, really mean that I can't automate the second time, at least for when I'm automating things that matter, things that are in important minutes. So what am I to do? Okay, thanks, Arlo. So you've blown up the only answer that we ever get on the internet. When should I automate the second time? You said that's wrong. So now what? Well, to answer now what, we need to look at the key underlying problem, right? And the key underlying problem is inherent in the framing of the question. And the receiver doesn't even notice it because it's inherent in their assumptions too. And that is the assumption that we're going to automate in one big chunk. Right? It's the assumption that writing automation consists of creating a script, which we will then have automatically do the process for us. Right? If that is our view of automation, then we have to answer the question, on which iteration do I automate? And from there, there's no right answer. So let's challenge that assumption. Let's see, how could we do automation so that it's not a big chunk? Right? So that instead of just the options of do or not do, I have the option of half-ass. Like, how could I half do automation? So for this, I need an incremental strategy. Right? Now, fortunately, when it comes to doing things continuously or incrementally, there really is one strategy. Like, this is the meta strategy underlying everything that I call something as a process. Naming as a process, or in this case, automation as a process. They all do the same thing. Right? And that meta strategy consists of 4 elements. So, number 1, there's a blended mode. Right? There's something that is simultaneously the old and the new. Right? And it starts out as 99.9% old, and it finishes off, and maybe like 0.1% new, and it finishes off as 99.9% new and 0.1% old, and between them it does some way of transitioning through those. Right? But at all points in that thing, it is a blend of the old and the new ways. Then I need some way, so that's blended mode. The second thing that I need is a ratchet. Right? I need some way to navigate this blended mode, because during this thing I've got the old and the new coexisting in kind of a funnel. There'll be pieces of each, right? And so I need to be able to identify which piece is in which mode. I need to identify where I am in the morass, how much. I need a measure that shows me how much am I along the way from old to new. And I need to be able to identify which chunks are in old and which chunks are in new and which chunks are in both at the same time so that I can take the right next action, right? And this is why I call it a ratchet, I need something that prevents backsliding, that will tell me when I'm taking something that was effectively new and recreating old, so that I can avoid doing that and always take steps towards the new. Right? So that's the ratchet. So I need blended mode, and I need a ratchet that will help me navigate it. Right? Then I need a third thing. I need a way to enter blended mode. And a fourth thing, a way to exit. Now, enter and exit are usually relatively simple once I've figured out the ratchet and the blended mode. So let's look at blended mode for this particular problem, for automation. Because if I can find the blended mode for automation, then we can smoothly do this as a process. And in fact, that's what automation as a process is. So I contend the blend, and this is often the case, the blend is doing it 100% manual while you're doing it 100% automatic. Now, most people think of the way you find blend and is to look at the middle of it where, what is it that's 50-50? Well, I find in the real world it never really transitions through a 50-50 state. It actually transitions more through a state where you've got all of the new stuff and all of the old stuff cohabitating in a messy, messy combo. But somehow a beautifully glorious messy combo, right? So what would that look like? Well, 100% manual plus 100% automated. The thing I think of it for that is it's an automated human. Right? So this is the mechanical Turk, where all of the steps and all the operations are done by a human, but there's a computer in charge. Right? The computer is following the process. We've got a fully scripted automated process that is run by a computer, and every time it wants to do something or decide something or verify something, I think that's all the things that you could have to do in an automated process. Anytime it wants to do those, it just tells a human, human, do something, or human, what should be done? Okay, now that you've decided that, do something, right? Now that you've done something, check your work, right? So we're going to create that as our blended mode. It's this automated human mechanical Turk that will be fully 100% automatic following the process, while at the same time being 100% manual in the execution of that. Cool. Now, what's the result? Like, if we're able to do that, and we're able to do this navigation through, what are we going to come out with? Well, this is actually almost identical to the white glove concierge in Lean Startup. In the white glove concierge, you've got a manual process. I create a product, but I don't actually create the product because I don't know whether it's going to be useful. I'm still in discovery, or I'm trying to find market fit, right? So what I do instead is I tell you that I've created the product, oh, customer of mine, and you can buy it. And when you buy it, I give you just enough of an illusion of facade up front that it looks like it's an automated project. It's a piece of software. And behind that, there are a bunch of humans running around like chickens with their heads cut off, doing things manually for you. Right? And we are just experimenting. As you make demands, we respond to those demands, and it's amazing what this software can do. And then we start to see the patterns, right? And that's exactly what's going to happen with this process, right? We start off with this manual process. We're going to start discovering those patterns. And as we start to see them, some of them become points where there's tremendous variation, and we want to keep all the vibrancy in the manual stuff there. But a lot of them, they're commodities. We do the same thing every time, or we do one of three things, right? And we choose it in a relatively easy fashion, or we need to check our work, and we do that in a relatively standard way. These commodities we automate because we're trying to reduce costs, right? So that white glove concierge, what you're doing is you're doing full discovery all the time while looking for how can I reduce costs to eventually make this a profitable business. Right? From the get-go, you have a business. From the get-go, you have an automated process. And then we want to make it cost effective. Right? And that happens over time. So when do I automate? Well, I start writing my automation before the first time that I do something, like before it's even shown up. And then I finish it, after the last time I'm going to do it. When there's the last manual step there, I guess I'm done, and then it runs thereafter. So automation becomes continuous. And that's what we mean by automation as a process. At any given moment, all the manual processes out there are somewhere along the process of automation.
That all sounds very intriguing, but how does one begin this incremental process? I'm Marian Hartman, the instructional designer, and I am very happy to say that Arlo will be facilitating a 4-week workshop in January to cover more than just a model, but also the habits and behaviors that you would need to do to adapt this into your everyday life and coding world. So check out our details on the website. Everything is there for this workshop at digdeeproots.com.